Welcome, everyone. We wanted to welcome you to Helping Teens Overcome Anxiety and Depression with Operation Parent and Zach Westerbeck. So, want to just take a minute and let you know you're in the right place for a great webinar today. As we're loading folks up in the queue, we wanted to tell you about a couple of our upcoming webinars. We have a rebroadcast, Empowering Teens to Have Healthy Dating Relationships. This is with Cassie Drockelman from the Mary Byron Foundation on Wednesday, February 10th at 8 o'clock in the evening. We also have a second rebroadcast, Adolescent Mental Health in 2021. This one's on February 17th, also at 8 o'clock with Dr. Aaron Weiner. I will mention, although this is a rebroadcast, it is brand new material. So those of you who have attended many of our webinars, you might want to put that one on your schedule as one that you haven't seen before, even though we're offering it at a rebroadcast type of program. Helping Families Navigate the System of Addiction and Understanding Treatment Options by Arlene Rice. This one is a live webinar, which will be February 23rd at 2 p.m. in the afternoon. So take a minute if those topics are speaking to you, and all of them are up live now, and you may register at any time. Operation Parent's mission is to love and support parents by providing real-world information, connection, and most importantly, hope. I wanted to first start by saying that due to the serious nature of today's topic, we're talking about anxiety, depression, and suicide. We would like to go beyond this informational presentation. If you are a fellow parent that needs someone to talk to or pray with, please email our founder, Jean, at operationparent.org. That's Jean at operationparent.org. Also, if you know someone who is thinking or talking about suicide, please call upon professional emergency resources. As always, we hope that our time together today provides you with new information, additional resources, and most importantly, hope. We've lost young people in our community recently to suicide, as I know many of you have. We offer our deepest sympathies to anyone, family, or friend who's with us today that has recently lost a loved one. So I did want to take just 1 minute and talk to you about how to participate in the webinar today. We have an orange arrow in the top right hand of our screen. You can use that to open up the control panel and just quickly look at these features with me. We're going to utilize the question section today. So that's about halfway down. And you can send us questions or comments anytime during the live presentation. That's the only spot that we're utilizing though. All attendees are going to be muted during this presentation, but we definitely want to hear from you in that question section, as we usually do. We have a couple of awesome handouts for you today. One is titled Helping Teens Cope with Anxiety During COVID. We've got 2 links to recent blog articles written by Zach Westerbeck there at the top of that handout. And then we also have a resource that we love, Hey Sigmund, Anxiety in Teens is the title of that handout. But Hey Sigmund is a wonderful resource for teens that are dealing with anxiety. And then lastly, we have the slide handout there as well. So if you wanted to download any of those handouts, we've got them posted for you here in the system. All you have to do is tap on it, download it while you're with us today. We also emailed those handouts to you right before we went live for this presentation. So if you don't get a chance to download or that's not working for you today, please check your email and you will hopefully also find handouts there. If you're not seeing them right away, if you could check maybe in your junk folder and see if they had gone there first. Okay, so also we're recording this presentation today, and the recording will be sent to you tomorrow afternoon. Our repeat viewers have been so gracious and remarkable to us in terms of completing the survey following this webinar. If you could continue to do that, it is so helpful to us, and we utilize it in a lot of different ways. But most importantly, we appreciate your love and support on that survey. So this is the funnest part of the presentation today for me anyways, getting to introduce Zach Westerbeck. He is a powerful personal story of triumph that he's going to share with you today. He is absolutely beyond passionate about teaching others the importance of caring for your brain and your mental health. If you know of a teen struggling with anxiety or depression or suicidal thoughts of any sort, you have definitely come to the right place today. He has put together an amazing presentation for you. Zach, we are happy to know you, and we are so thankful for your time and effort in putting this together for us today.
Thank you for the introduction, Michelle. I really appreciate it. And a big thank you to you, Mary Beth, Nikki, Operation Parent. And then thank you so much to everybody that is on the webinar today. I certainly love to be a part of being in partnership with Operation Parent. And hopefully the goal today is to bring some information, connection, and then as much hope as possible, because hope is the seed to recovery. And so my name is Zach Westerbeck. I'm a mental health advocate. I'm a professional speaker. I am a college success coach, and I'm the author of the book, You're Not Alone, which is a mental health guide to help young adults overcome anxiety and depression. And I always joke with the students, back in the old days when we used to do these programs in person, that this path for me was very unintended. And so a little bit of background on myself is that I was born and raised in Indianapolis, Indiana, to two loving parents and my sister, my sibling, my sister. She's one of my best friends to this day. And my childhood was largely comprised of going to school, hanging out with friends, and playing sports. And after I graduated from high school, I went on to attend Purdue University. And while I was there, I was a part of the Greek community, and I just had a great experience. And so I didn't really think much about my mental health in the early days. But then I moved to Raleigh, North Carolina to start my first job with the tech giant Cisco Systems. And I was going to be in their early in career program. It was a 12-month program, and everything was going really, really great for the first 10 months. And then right around the 10-month mark, things started to change with the way that my brain functioned. And all of a sudden, I was waking up with a pounding heart, sweaty palms, a dry mouth, and racing thoughts, all symptoms that I'd never felt before. And I was 22 years old, a 10-hour drive from home, and I knew that I didn't like what I was feeling, but I had no idea what was going on with my brain. And in all of my infinite wisdom, I thought that my brain was like a light switch. And something had been flipped on in my brain, and all I had to do was flip it back. And so January was right around the corner, and I resolved that that's what I was going to do for 2016. I was going to flip my brain back to the way that it used to be. And the way that I was going to do that is I was going to go to work, then I was going to go to the gym, sit in the steam room, just sweat out all of the toxins from 4 years of college, the early in career program. I just needed a reset. That's what my body and my brain needed. And I was going to do that over the course of 31 days, and that was going to reset my brain. And so that's what I did. And I did get results. The only challenge is that it wasn't the results that I was looking for. And by the end of the month, not only had the symptoms I've just told you about gotten worse and intensified, that I now know is anxiety, but a second symptom had crept into my life, and that was depression. And I had never experienced depression in my life, and I didn't understand it at a deep visceral level in terms of the impact that it could have on a human being. But in a matter of a couple months, my world is now flipped upside down. I'm severely anxious, I'm deeply depressed, I'm in this new city, and I have no clue why this is happening to my brain. So I go into full-blown panic mode, trying what I like to call Zach's home remedies. That's what I call it at this time. Just trying different things to, again, flip my brain back. I was clinging on to this idea that I could reset my brain. And over the next couple of months, I did a few things really, really well. The first of which is I denied to the outside world what was going on. They had no idea what was going on with me internally. From the outside, it looked like I had the perfect life between the job and friends. And at that time, I was starting to date somebody who's my now fiance. But on the inside, I was dying. And that was the second thing that I was doing really well, was pretending to myself that things were getting better when indeed they were just getting worse. And at the peak of my symptoms, I was having thoughts of suicide from the moment I woke up until the moment I went to bed. So this was going to work, sitting in meetings, trying to care about my job, trying to hang out with my then roommates at the time after work, and then going to my room, throwing myself on the bed and praying that I just fell asleep to escape my brain. And I learned that, those thoughts of suicide were not thoughts that I was choosing. Depression, anxiety, these were not symptoms that I was choosing. And it wasn't until I hit my rock bottom moment that I confided in my parents and I expressed to them everything that I was experiencing. And they did two things for me, which is why I advocate and do what I do now, which is why I'm so glad to be speaking with you today. They didn't have all the answers, but they didn't judge me, and they encouraged me to go out and seek help. They didn't even know where I needed to go seek help. They just knew that I needed to talk to somebody outside of them about what I was going through. And so the very next day, I scheduled an appointment with a therapist. And although she wasn't the one that I ended with, she was the one that catapulted me into my recovery. And in late 2016, I was matched up with a therapist that knew what was going on with me. And I was diagnosed with a chronic anxiety disorder known as obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD, where the core symptoms are severe anxiety, deep depression, and thoughts of suicide. And I immediately started talk therapy specific to OCD. And we'll talk about that later on in the workshop. But over the next couple years, through talk therapy, through lifestyle changes, through mindset shifts, I started to recover. And through that journey, I promised that I would never let somebody else suffer in silence ever again. And which is why I advocate now. And through that journey, I learned something really, really important. And that's that everybody has brain health. And the reason why I don't say mental health and I use the term brain health is as a destigmatizing tool. You see, our brains are an organ, the most important organ. I'm biased, but the most important organ in our body. Just like our hearts, it's a tangible organ that we can grab and we can hold. And we know that there are actions that we can take to improve our hearts, which is why we call our heart health and not soul health, because we know that we can run, we can exercise, we can eat the right foods to take care of our hearts. Well, this is the same exact thing for our brains. And so today, I want to share some of those lessons with you that I learned in my journey. So there's really 4 core learning objectives today that I'd like to share with you. First and foremost, we're going to learn how to communicate. I want to teach you how to effectively communicate with your anxious and depressed teen to become a trusted confidant. This area is oftentimes deemed as an uncomfortable topic to talk about. And that's because at a societal level, we've made it uncomfortable. I have thousands of these conversations talking about anxiety, depression, thoughts of suicide, and it's not uncomfortable for me because I have these conversations all the time, and I know that recovery is possible. The second thing we're going to talk about is recognizing the signs and symptoms. I want to turn everybody on this call into an advocate for yourself, for your son or daughter, for your community. And then we'll talk about the support side of things, understanding the do's and the don'ts to successfully support your teen, which then leads into the last part about finding the right resources, because ultimately it's about recovery and you can recover. I'm proof of that. And we'll talk about that here in a second. But long-term recovery is possible. No matter what you're struggling with, no matter what your son or daughter is struggling with, recovery is possible. To begin with, I do want to paint, oh, that's right, sorry. We got one big announcement before. I'm eager. I love to get to the information. One big announcement before we jump in is that, as I mentioned, I'm the author of the book, You're Not Alone, which is a mental health guide for young adults. And so in partnership with Operation Parent, I'm going to be giving away a free signed copy of the book. That's going to be announced at the end. They'll be handling the random selection there. So I'll let them take that task towards the end, but we'll be making an announcement on giving away a free book at the end of the workshop. So getting into the numbers, when you take a second and read and study the trends that are taking place in this country and worldwide, something that is undeniable is that brain health challenges like anxiety, depression, thoughts of suicide, stress, and overwhelm are at higher levels, more prevalent than ever before with every age group, but especially with Gen Zers or teenagers and then millennials, right? So young adults going up into your 30s. And so the National Survey of Children's Health released a study that found that 7% of teens reported the prevalence of an anxiety disorder, and nearly 13% reported experiencing a major depressive episode in the past year. These numbers are huge, and they will come out and tell you, the National Survey of Children's Health will come out and tell you, first and foremost, these numbers are up from their previous survey that they released a few years back. The other factor that they want to mention is that they don't think that these numbers are accurate because of the stigma and because it's difficult to reach this age group to get accurate reporting. So they actually think that these numbers might be a lot higher. Now, if you draw your attention to the bottom of the screen, less than 50% of teens reported being treated for anxiety or depression in the last year. And what I go to in these pandemic times and COVID times is thinking about if there was a massive outbreak of COVID amongst teens and less than 50% of them were being treated. That would be pretty frustrating. That would be headline news. And yet this is something that isn't being mainstreamed as much as it probably should be. Again, I know I'm biased, but this is really impacting our teens. Now, as we move into the young adult side of things, the American College Health Association released their most recent report, was released in 2018. And the reason why these numbers are important is because the onset of the majority of brain disorders, anxiety, depression, stress, overwhelm, thoughts of suicide, are going to manifest themselves between the ages of 18 and 24. So if you're somebody on the call right now who has a teenage aged son or daughter, I just want you to understand that eventually, they're going to grow up, they're going to become a young adult. And if they're not struggling with something right now, there's still a chance that they could. And we want to be proactive with our education and our preparation and preparing them for what might be coming. So when you look at the numbers here, 55% of students reported feeling things were hopeless. And as somebody that has struggled with anxiety or depression, I can tell you that hopelessness is the seed of doubt that leads to anxiety, depression, thoughts of suicide, which is why we want to spread information, connection, and hope. 88% report feeling overwhelmed. And then at the bottom, you'll see that depression and anxiety play a major factor in young adults' experience while they're in school, while they're at the college level. And whether your son or daughter is going to be going to college, picking up a trade, moving out into the real world and figuring things out, they're in their process. Just understand that this impacts everyone. So we need to care about it. And what I realized is that one of the biggest hurdles that I faced early on in my brain health journey and my recovery, and what I see time and again with the young adults that I work with through my coaching practice, is that I believed that brain illness or brain health equaled brain illness. In other words, you were either mentally well or you were mentally ill. If you were mentally well, then everything was going to be great. You were going to be good to go. You were going to have a successful life. Your brain could just run on autopilot. I want you to think, how many of you on the call kind of let your brain run on autopilot? You don't really think about it that much. I know I certainly didn't before my diagnosis. If I was mentally ill, this meant that something was wrong with me. So you could imagine the dilemma that I felt when I left the psychologist's office for the first time after receiving my diagnosis. Some relief, some shame, because feeling like something is wrong with you isn't very empowering. It leads to stigma, lack of motivation, feelings of guilt, a belief that you have to hide your situation, that you can't improve. But what I've learned through my experience is that our brain health is much more of a continuum. It's something that all of us, every single person on this call, every single person on the face of the planet, fluctuates back and forth on based on different factors in our lives, like our genetics, like the daily stresses of life, and then the significant event, the things that we go through in our lives. And so this slide right here is really, really important. So if you've got a pen and a pad out, please take some notes here. This is the brain health continuum. And this is how I want you to start thinking about your son or daughter's health, your own brain health, your community's brain health. And one correlation that I'll make just quickly is our physical health sits on a continuum, if you think about it, right? Sometimes we're in great shape, sometimes we get out of shape, sometimes we're really healthy, sometimes we come down with an illness. That's the same thing with our brains. So up top, we've got 5 factors that contribute to brain health, and they are all at all times 24/7 impacting our emotional well-being. On the bottom, we've got the actual brain health continuum, where on the left, we're living a balanced life, and on the right, we're not able to balance. So starting from left to right, there are a couple key factors that I want to point out. From an everyday challenges standpoint, stress, lack of sleep, low self-esteem, and isolation are impacting your teens at an extremely high level. There's more pressure put on Gen Z and millennials than any generation before because of globalization and so many other factors to do well in school, get the best jobs, be in all the right clubs. And so stress in the body can register in many different ways. And as I tell the young adults and the individuals that I coach and work with on one-on-one, stress isn't always a negative thing. Stress can be a good thing and it can be a bad thing. Good stress is the type of stress that we feel in the short term that gets us motivated to accomplish a task. However, chronic stress is what leads to higher levels of cortisol in the body, which then opens the door to anxiety, depression, thoughts of suicide, overwhelm, and a lack of sleep. So stress and lack of sleep really feed each other. Because when we think about lack of sleep, more teens and young adults than ever before are getting less sleep than they actually need. The majority of them are getting between 5 to 6 when their age group needs to be getting between 8 to 10. And one of the functions of sleep that's really, really important is that it actually reduces cortisol levels in the body when you sleep so that you can wake up refreshed. So they feed each other in either a negative loop or a positive loop, where the less stress you experience, the better sleep, the better quality sleep you get. The more stress that you experience, the less quality sleep that you get. So you understand that. Low self-esteem, which is a huge factor in the teenage years. They're going through puberty. They're trying to understand who they are. There's hormone levels through the roof. Understanding that studies have found that low levels of self-esteem lead to higher levels of anxiety, depression, thoughts of suicide. And then lastly is isolation. And sadly, I was just reading an article published in the New York Times regarding the uptick in teenage suicide during the pandemic because of isolation. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But our teens feel disconnected. They miss their friends. They miss their activities. And this is really, really taking a toll on their brain health. From an environmental standpoint, thinking about bullying, cyberbullying, and then the impact that social media has on their brain health. And we'll talk about social media hygiene later on in the workshop. I want to make sure that we get there. Significant events, death, divorce, breakups, any sort of transition, all of these register as traumatic events in the eyes of a young adult, in the eyes of a teenager. So understanding that a breakup might not just be something that they can push through and move on from, but is actually something that's taking an emotional toll on them and is very impactful to their emotional well-being. And then we get to the genetic side, right? The brain health disorders and developmental disabilities. Do depression, anxiety run in your family? Do bipolar disorder, OCD, schizophrenia, eating disorders? Knowing what the genetic disposition is, sorry, easy for me to say, get too excited, get ahead of myself, for your family. And studies have shown that about 20 to 40% of offspring will inherit those genes. And we talk about diabetes, we talk about cancer, we talk about heart disease in families, but are we doing it as it pertains to the brain? So when you think about the continuum, where on one side you're living a balanced life, on the other side you're not able to balance. Let's use me as the guinea pig. If our brain health was fixed, if we were incapable of recovery, then one would believe that I would probably spend a lot of my time not able to balance. Because prior to the onset of my brain disorder, I spent a lot of time between a balanced life and difficult to balance. And of course, I didn't have the words for it at the time, but I experienced everyday challenges as a teen, as a young adult, between stress, not prioritizing sleep, maybe not having the highest self-esteem. And so I would fluctuate, of course, without knowing. But once I experienced the onset of my brain disorder, I quickly moved to the other side of the continuum where I was not able to balance. I couldn't maintain my responsibilities. It was difficult to keep a positive outlook on life. It was challenging to maintain relationships and show up to work and perform. And so it really required that I seek help. Now, here's the encouraging part. Once I started to seek help, I began to move from not being able to balance to need help to balance, to difficult to balance, to now where I spend my life largely fluctuating between a balanced life and need help to balance. And to frame things up for you, obsessive compulsive disorder impacts 1% of the world's population. So that's a lot of people, but it's also a niche brain disorder, and it can be very debilitating. So for somebody to be able to fluctuate between balanced life and need help to balance just proves that recovery is possible. So what are some of the challenges that your teen might be facing? Could we go back one slide, please, Mary Beth? Thank you. So just a couple things I want you to consider. I want to make sure I'm staying on time here. Is the undiagnosed depression or anxiety. So a lot of times when I work with coaching clients, they've been experiencing anxiety or depression since middle school, and they didn't have the words for it. The family didn't, maybe understand what was going on with them. And what studies have shown is that the longer that it takes to seek help, the longer it takes to recover. And then those feelings of isolation. There was a study released by Cigna that found that millennials and Gen Zers were the loneliest generations in the United States today. And loneliness is directly correlated to higher levels of anxiety, depression, and thoughts of suicide. We are social creatures. We need connection. So really thinking, taking a second and thinking, how is isolation playing a factor in your child's life today? And where do you think they sit on the continuum? So the next part of the workshop I want to talk about is the signs and symptoms of depression, anxiety, and suicide, because I really want to turn everybody into an advocate, of course, for your children, but for yourself as well, because we can take care of others our best when we feel our best. So to begin with, it's important to understand that depression isn't your son or daughter being lazy. It's not them acting out or not being strong enough. It's not them not being able to push through. And depression isn't something that just disappears with time. It actually takes intentional action. And depression is categorized as sadness that lingers, persists, and intensifies over a 2-week period or more. So if you are hearing your son or daughter talking about being sad, or you're seeing some of the symptoms, of course, you might be scanning over some of the symptoms right now, and they've lasted for longer than 2 weeks, could be a sign that they're experiencing depression. So from an emotion standpoint, the couple of big ones I'll point out is outbursts of anger, and then lack of emotional responsiveness. So they might report feeling numb, feeling zombie-like. They could say things like, I'm just not interested in doing anything anymore. That could be a signifier that they're depressed. From a behavior standpoint, neglect of responsibilities. That's always something that I see with parents that are frustrated with their son or daughter because they're not keeping up with their responsibilities. And this loss of motivation could be perceived as laziness, when in reality, it's really, really the depression. And depression is so challenging. I want you to imagine trying to run through mud. That's what it feels like living with depression. As somebody who's experienced, I can tell you, just putting one foot in front of the other can be one of the hardest tasks. And then the use of drugs or alcohol. And this should be taken seriously. I had a buddy in high school who was severely depressed and was abusing alcohol and cannabis from a young age. We thought that he just liked to party. And, over 15 years later, those habits are still in place, and he hasn't, and his depression has only gotten worse with time because he refuses to get help. So understanding just how important it is to seek help. And then you've got your thoughts and some physical manifestations in terms of chronic fatigue, lack of energy, sleeping too much or too little. And then you could see a influx in weight gain or weight loss. I lost 15 pounds in a matter of a month at the peak of my depression. Next, we have anxiety. And the big thing I want you to understand here is anxiety is just the fight or flight system turned up. And essentially, what's frustrating about it for somebody who lives with anxiety on a daily basis is that it's really, really hard to turn it down. So, saying phrases like calm down or just relax aren't really helpful because the individual wants to relax. We want to feel calm. It's just that there's very little that we can do to actually make that happen. Now, I will talk about some techniques to improve anxiety, but we can't just shut it off. And know that anxiety is very, very taxing on the nervous system, which is why exhaustion, fatigue are really prevalent amongst us individuals that live with chronic anxiety or depression, because our nervous system is constantly being taxed. And just imagine your fight or flight system being turned up 24/7. So a couple big ones I'll point out: the pounding heart, that's going to be a big indicator. Anytime they're avoiding or isolating themselves, maybe they're coming home, going straight to their rooms, and you don't see them again until the next morning. This is avoidance. This could be a sign. From a neurological standpoint, headaches, tingling. Maybe they report tingling down the arm. I know for me, I live on and off with headaches because of the anxiety. Again, not something I choose. It's just part of my daily life. Gastrointestinal standpoint, dry mouth, stomach pain. I was on an antacid for 3 years, an over-the-counter antacid for 3 years. Got an endoscopy, a colonoscopy, because I was having stomach issues. And the moment that we identified that it was anxiety, the stomach issues completely went away. So understanding that anxiety can manifest itself in the body in a lot of different ways. And then irritability, that could be a big one. Just, you might chalk it up to your teen being moody, but it could be irritability because, again, their fight or flight system that is constant, it's turned on to tell you that something's wrong, is always on. And that can become very frustrating because it's really hard to relax. And lastly, signs that your child is feeling suicidal. The big things that I want to point out is hopelessness. Again, hope is the seed to recovery. Hopelessness is the seed of doubt that will lead to deeper levels of anxiety, depression, and ultimately suicide. I became suicidal when I felt like there was no more hope, and I started to recover and have managed a high level of recovery because I have hope that I can recover. Again, that drug and alcohol use, withdrawal, these are all actions that you can see manifesting themselves. And then if they have a detailed plan. So studies have shown that the more detailed the plan is, the more likely they are to actually attempt and complete suicide. And I do want you to keep this in mind. This is kind of a gotcha with suicide. Oftentimes, individuals that have exhibited those signs and symptoms of depression, remember, think about that again, that maybe that low mood, lack of motivation, that all of a sudden a massive mood swing to being very happy, being very outgoing, having a lot of energy, doesn't necessarily mean that they've kicked the depression or that their suicidal thoughts have gone away. What it might actually indicate is that they've come to terms with the fact that they are going to complete suicide, and it's brought them temporary relief. So being aware of that, and that article is in the New York Times. You can look it up. There was one family whose son had that switch, and then he completed suicide. So it really does manifest itself like that in some cases. So what are the real world signs of underlying brain health challenges? The biggest thing that I see, and often what I get called in for, is if a student is successful academically and all of a sudden in a semester or a quarter, their grades have just declined rapidly. So that's a huge indicator. And then what you'll see after that is the withdrawal from friends. And it's almost like I see it every single time. Withdrawal from friends, a decline interest in activities, those will go next. And then you'll see them spending a lot of time in their room. Their eating habits will change, and then their sleeping patterns will be off. So just thinking through that lens, asking yourself, which ones have you seen with your son or daughter, or yourself? Maybe you're on this webinar for you as well, for that hope. So just understanding that those are how they manifest themselves in the real world. Next, I want to talk about the brain health action plan. This is ALGE. This is pulled from the mental health first aid that I'm certified in. And essentially what we're talking about here is assessing for risk and intervening in a crisis. So this is crash course, but the biggest thing that I want you to understand is that this tool right here has worked incredibly well for me. I've intervened on many suicides or people that were in crisis using ALGE. So to begin with, we want to assess for risk of suicide or harm. So thinking back through the signs and symptoms of depression, anxiety, and suicide. So just thinking back on that, giving you a second to think on that, and then listening non-judgmentally. We'll talk about this a little more in depth, but we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And when it comes to somebody being in crisis, they just want to be heard. Whether this be your son or your daughter, a friend in the community, whoever it might be, listening to them. Next is giving reassurance and information. So this is that opportunity to plant that seed of hope. Hey, I want you to know recovery is possible. I want to help you. I'm here for you. I care about you. Words like that, things that are affirming, things that are going to lift them up. And then we want to encourage appropriate professional help. And with teenagers, the laws vary depending on the state. So I don't know which states everybody is coming from, but helping them schedule those appointments so that they can see a therapist. Okay, this is where I want to take a second and infuse some hope and let you know that it's okay to not be okay. Whether this is your son or daughter, whether this is you, it's normal as a parent to want to see your child do their best and succeed and perform well and not be struggling. But understand that as human beings, when we were born, we signed up, whether we knew it or not, I certainly didn't know, to experience the full spectrum of emotions, just like we talked about with the brain health continuum. And just cultivating a culture of openness and understanding is going to be critical. And we're going to talk about that now. But just know it's okay to not be okay, but it's not okay to do nothing about it. So we want to encourage our teens, hey, it's okay if you're anxious. It's okay if you're depressed, but let's do something about it because I know we can make this better. So how do we foster open communication? And oftentimes I get called in to work with clients one-on-one because the communication has been severed and the parents aren't able to get much information out of their child. Maybe that's why you're here today. So the first thing is we want to have early identification. So this is thinking back to the signs and symptoms, seeing the warning signs. And I do want you to know that sometimes it's difficult to see the signs, which is why we want to open up lines of communication and develop a brain health obsessed culture inside of the house where we're constantly doing pulse checks on our emotional well-being. We want to understand transitions and then transfer knowledge. This is a big one. So we want to have open discussions with our son or daughter around their mental health, around substance use, and around physical intimacy. This is right around that age group. Teenagers are right around that age group where they're going to start to experiment with these various categories. And as a parent, I want to be very clear. You should always set your expectations, but it's better to create open lines of communication so that you can, looking at the rest of the list, build respect, rapport, and trust so that you become a confidant, a trusted confidant, somebody that they come to for advice and guidance. And ultimately, that's really what we want. We want to know what our teens are up to, how they're feeling, so that we can support them. So a general outline for a conversation. As you're thinking about building out that brain obsessed culture in the household, we want to be a little formal up front. So we want to schedule a formal, organized time to speak to our son or daughter about their emotional well-being. So it doesn't necessarily need to be about anxiety or depression. If you don't suspect that your teen is struggling with those symptoms now, even better. Let's be proactive with it so that if and when that does happen, they're well versed in these conversations and it's easy. It's no problem convincing them to go seek professional help. And the biggest tool that I'll say here is the vulnerability and commonality is so important. But I do want to say that it's so important to avoid prescribing. So we want to listen to them without prescribing. In other words, telling them what they need to do to improve their brain health, because this oftentimes shuts the door on open communication and kills credibility. Unless you have these are the L's, unless you have a lived experience or you're a licensed professional, I would prefer that you listen so that they can explain to you how they're feeling and then help them find the resources that they need, because they'll then associate you as somebody that can help them improve versus giving them unwarranted advice that might not be beneficial at all. So how do we speak to somebody who is struggling? Well, we want to express to that person that you care about them. and that you want to help. So this is the expression of empathy and support. And this could come in the form of open-ended questions, asking them what is top of mind for them. I start off every coaching call with my clients like that. Hey, what is top of mind for you? And then I listen. I don't give any advice. I listen and gently try to guide them down the path of encouraging professional assistance. And I would, in your particular case, and we're going to talk about this, offer steps to schedule the appointment with them, but set expectations that it's not going to be an overnight process. So here's some examples of questions and statements that you can ask. And there's a couple I'll point out, just starting with a simple, how have you felt lately? That can be so meaningful. When I was first experiencing the onset of my brain disorder, I could have really benefited from that question a lot. And I think people were hesitant to ask because they didn't think that they had the right words to say, when I really just needed a lending ear, a loving lending ear. Feeling depressed or anxious is normal. You shouldn't feel embarrassed or ashamed. Talking about it is always the best option. Normalizing, making them understand that these symptoms are just a part of the wide range of emotions that all human beings can and will experience. So take a screenshot of this if you want. These are all beneficial phrases that I use in my advocacy work, phrases pulled from the mental health first aid. So we'll go to the next slide. There are some don'ts. And largely when we think about phrases to avoid, we want to make sure that we're avoiding not validating their thoughts and their feelings. So downplaying what they're going through, belittling what they're going through, and then prescribing. So one of the big things could be telling someone to stop thinking about it. Just assuming that when a certain thought pops up in their head, if they just think about something else, it'll go away. I'm sure that some of you maybe have thought either stop whining or calm down. And this is not about judgment. This is about growth. As an advocate, I've had all these thoughts towards myself and towards others, and it takes the reprogramming of the brain to start to think about brain health differently. So whether you've said any of these out loud or you've thought them, that's completely okay. But let's work to change that mentality as it pertains to brain health. So how do I wish I would have been supported? I wanted to do some reflecting to share with you because your teen might be wanting some of these same things. The big one that I'll point out is that not talking about it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Early on, a lot of people told me that they didn't want to talk to me about my challenges because they thought that it would remind me, that I had anxiety or depression when I was already experiencing those symptoms. And in fact, I was looking for somebody to be open and talk to me, which leads me to my last point on this slide, which is I wish more people would have been curious as to what it felt like to experience these symptoms. So be curious about what it's like to live with anxiety or depression. Take a little bit of time to do some research. And I remember feeling like, man, I wish I would have had cancer because at least I think people would have been rooting for me to recover. I felt like I was on an island and so alone. So just taking that interest, listening, taking interest can go so far in your teen's recovery. And then lastly, we want to encourage appropriate help. And so this is a general guideline. I'm always happy to coach you through a more in-depth process, but largely if you have insurance, you can go to your health insurance provider's online portal. You can go to the mental health section and they will provide you a list of in-network mental health care providers, and you can download that list and start making phone calls. And oftentimes what I'll do is I'll cross-reference that downloaded list with psychologytoday.com, which is it aggregates all of the mental health care providers across the country to see what are their specialties. Are they male? Are they female? What are they licensed in? How have they treated people before? What are the reviews? So using that as a great tool, and then scheduling the first appointment on their behalf, and ideally going with them, and if they give you permission, sitting in the meeting, because it's a great opportunity for learning. Next, we want to set up the family culture. And there's really 3 steps to this. We want to normalize brain health, demonstrate it as the #1 priority in a household, and then emphasize help-seeking behavior. As it pertains to normalizing brain health, I want you to think about this: expression, not suppression. Expression, not suppression. In my household, it wasn't common to talk about the struggles that you were going through. You had them and you just kind of figured them out on your own. And so that was the belief system I had when I was struggling with anxiety and depression, is that I needed to solve this challenge on my own. And it wasn't until it was at its lowest point that I reached out for help. Well, we want to be proactive. I mean, we don't want our son or daughter to be to the point where they're thinking about suicide before they seek help. But we have to create that culture in the household that mom and dad talk about their feelings. And one example of this could be talking about it at a family dinner, going around the horn and explicitly making it a point to talk about your emotional health for the day, the month, any times you've ever experienced a hardship, because this starts to condition our children to think about their brain health and their emotional well-being and understand, oh, wow, mom and dad talk about this openly, so it must mean it's okay for me to. Next, we want to demonstrate through our actions that brain health is our number one priority, becoming a brain health obsessed family. And this really just takes a shift in perspective. So rather than looking at the gym as an opportunity to work on your body, it's an opportunity to work on your brain and your body. So you go to the gym to work on your emotional well-being as well as get results that you want for your body. Or you meditate to give your brain what it needs to naturally calm down and cope with stress. And then lastly, we want to emphasize help-seeking behavior. And the way that I liken it is we have typically most families have a general practitioner, they have a dentist. Why don't we have a family therapist for every American across the country? We all deal with challenges, we all deal with struggles, we're all going to feel the wide spectrum of emotions. And even if it's just an annual checkup, that demonstrates that you are putting your brain in the list of priorities to take care of. So we want to create a brain health blueprint. And the brain health blueprint is a simple formula or process that I follow on a daily basis to help manage my anxiety or depression. And so I'm constantly getting real world feedback on what works and what doesn't. And so there are some couple core areas that I want to share with you all on how your team can care for their brain health. So it's really broken down into 3 steps: sticking to a routine, having healthy social media hygiene, and then getting into nature on a weekly basis. These are all activities and actions that over time will help a young adult, a teenager cope with anxiety, depression, thoughts of suicide, and in some cases, completely get rid of those symptoms. And when we think about sticking to a routine, there's going to be a school routine, there's going to be an extracurricular routine. Could we go back, Mary Beth, please? There's also needs to be a routine for their sleep schedule, their meditation, and their movement, which I want to differentiate between exercise important, but movement. From a social media hygiene standpoint, we want to measure screen time and time on the social apps. So I'll talk about social media best practices here in a second. And then getting into nature. There was a study, there's been many studies released, but there were a handful of Swedish doctors that released a study that found that treating their clients with 30 minutes to an hour of nature drastically improved their symptoms of anxiety, depression, thoughts of suicide. So I've been treating myself with nature for years. I'm not saying it's going to cure anxiety or depression, but it really does work in terms of reducing those symptoms and promoting feelings of calm. And the studies and the metrics point to that as well. So thank you, Mary Beth. We can go to the next slide. Appreciate it. So from a sleep metric standpoint, my big belief system is what you track improves, and numbers don't lie. So what you'll see here is my sleep tracked through my Apple Watch that I have right here onto the app Auto Sleep. And what I have here is on the left-hand side, 1 day's worth of sleep, and then on the other, an aggregate over the entire month of January. And what you'll see is it breaks down deep sleep, quality sleep, and overall sleep. And what I like about this is when I work with my clients, I always push them to either track their sleep manually or to use some form of technology, whether it be an Apple Watch, a running watch, a Whoop, to gather this data, because it gets them excited to see the progress. And again, it no longer becomes a guessing game. The metrics tell the story for you. And sleep has a whole host of benefits The biggest of which, and why I care about it so much, is that it's been proven to decrease symptoms of anxiety, depression, and thoughts of suicide. So that's absolutely something we want scheduled in the routine. The next metric that I think is really, really important is meditation. On top of being a mental health advocate, I'm also a meditation advocate. And so you can see I've meditated for nearly 19,000 minutes. The middle slide shows that I was on a streak of 5 days. And on the far right, I measure my stress levels on a monthly basis. So again, I can aggregate data to see how my sleep has been over time. And what's important to understand here is that meditation is exercise for the brain. It naturally induces feelings of calm and reduces feelings of anxiety and depression over time. So just like going to the gym will get you results for your body over time, it's the same with meditation. It's a daily practice, and studies have shown that you only need 10 minutes of meditation a day. And one of the most rewarding things is that every time I put a client on 10 minutes of meditation, as a young adult, as a teen, they gravitate towards meditation almost immediately because they start to feel those results. They get excited about it themselves because now they do have a real tool to help them calm down, to help them relax. And you can use apps like Headspace, Calm, My Life, or YouTube has free meditations as well. And lastly, movement. And when I think about movement, I think that motion is emotion. We live in a very stagnant world, all of us. We're sitting more than ever before, and yet our ancestors were nomads that traveled hundreds of miles over the course of a month and a year. So our bodies and our brains are really accustomed to a lot of movement. And what studies have shown is that light walks and movement get blood flowing through the body into the brain and can drastically improve mood and reduce, again, those symptoms of stress, overwhelm, anxiety, depression, thoughts of suicide. So you can see here, again, I aggregate the data. I always want to try to get about 10,000 steps a day. I notice a change in my mood if I don't. And then on the right, I took 2 separate walks the other day, and I wanted to record that for all of you because I had been sitting down for so long. I'd become very stagnant. I'd built up tension in the body. And by the end of both of these walks, I felt calm again. I had clarity. So promoting this with our teens, and really all we need is 30 minutes of movement a day. The last metric that's really important to track is social media. There is a direct correlation, a linear correlation between time spent on those platforms, and your teens or young adults are probably going to be using TikTok and Instagram. There's a direct correlation between time spent on the apps and the likelihood that they experience stress, anxiety, depression, and thoughts of suicide. Because the moment that you engage in one of these apps, whether you want to or not, you're playing the comparison game. They're looking at the amount of likes and follows that their peers are getting, and they're sizing themselves up against the outside world. And the reason why I like the numbers is, again, the numbers don't lie. So you can create a target number that you all agree on, mutually agree on, that is comfortable for them to use the apps. So it's about putting a schedule around usage, establishing a reason for using it that's empowering, not something that's going to tear them down. And then as a result, they become more mindful of how the posts make them feel and how they want to engage in the platform. So I really think it's important to put some numbers around that. And I do that with my clients. We want to know the talk therapy options, and I'm running a little low on time, and I want to answer Q&A. So cognitive behavioral therapy is the overarching talk therapy. It's scientifically been proven to effectively treat anxiety, depression, thoughts of suicide, any of the more intense brain disorders. Cognitive behavioral therapy is the starting point. So that is what I would look for in a therapist. And then exposure and response prevention. As somebody who lives with OCD, I want to tell you right now that if your son or daughter has been diagnosed with OCD, they need to be receiving ERP talk therapy. It is the one and only effective treatment for OCD. It is the only thing that will drastically improve their symptoms. I promise you that. So signs that their therapist is a good fit. I'd love for you to take a screenshot of this. But therapy is like the dating process. You want them to connect. There needs to be some sort of connection. We need to make sure that they don't feel judged. And then we want to think about ability. Does this therapist have the ability to treat their symptoms? In my example, there were therapists that didn't, and then eventually I found one who did. And once I did find a therapist that knew how to treat me, I drastically improved. So it's not enough to just go to therapy. We have to find the right therapy. there are some questions that you can ask a brain health specialist. I'll let you take a screenshot of this, but generally speaking, we want to understand what they specialize in. What have they gone to school for? How have they treated clients? How have they been successful in the past? These are all questions that I ask when I call in on behalf of my clients, but they're important to ask. Medication considerations. I'm not a doctor, so I can't prescribe. I don't want to go in depth on medication, but I will tell you the biggest warning signs that I see with medication is the side effects. So understanding what are the side effects of the SSRIs or the benzos, the anti-anxiety, antidepressant medications that my son or daughter is on, because oftentimes these medications can actually intensify thoughts of suicide. So just keeping that in mind as you're building out your brain health blueprint with them. Lastly, paying for a therapist. There are now more options than ever before. So whether you're somebody with insurance or you don't have insurance, there's something for everybody. So first off, understanding if there's a copay or a deductible, how many visits are covered before you have to start paying out of pocket is really important to understand. And then what I really want to point out is the sliding scale. So free options are at community centers. You can find free options at community centers. You can find free resources with nonprofits like Operation Parent, Peace of Mind Foundation, One Mind, all nonprofits that I partner with. Or you can ask a psychologist if they're on a sliding scale. And they'll tell you that on psychologytoday.com. And basically what that means is they're willing to take their price down significantly to meet your economic means. In terms of resources, psychologytoday.com is a great place to start. And then if you're looking for virtual support, Talkspace or BetterHelp. So if you're in a rural environment or a place that doesn't have great resources, use virtual support. They're great. And studies have shown that virtual support is just as effective. And lastly, I want you to know that no matter what your son or daughter is going through, that this too shall pass. This too shall pass. When your son or daughter is in that dark place, they might believe that they're going to experience these symptoms forever. And this can create a very hopeless feeling. But the truth is that nothing stays the same in life with intentional action. And everything is always changing. So why would this be any different for your son or daughter's depression, anxiety, thoughts of suicide? Don't make the mistake of believing that these symptoms are going to last forever. And just reiterate to them, constantly infusing that seed of hope, that this too shall pass. And lastly, I will mention that I do have a personalized one-on-one coaching program. If that's something of interest to you, you can see the coaching objectives there. But the idea is to build out a brain health blueprint with them through goal setting and weekly action planning. There are core metrics that we track. And then we develop coping and mindfulness skills to improve anxiety and depression, as well as short-term and long-term academic planning. And I'm excited to announce that in partnership with Operation Parent, if you want to reach out to me, you can send an email to me. Just mention Operation Parent, and I'm going to be providing a special discount for anybody that comes from the webinar from Operation Parent, because I've really enjoyed this partnership. And then if you want to stay connected, these are all the different ways. My webpage, zachwesterbeck.com, or you can find me on Facebook, LinkedIn, or Instagram.
All right. Thank you, Zach. You did a great job, and it was great information. I learned a lot. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and let everybody know. Please go ahead and post any questions that you may have and put them into the question feature and put them in there so that we can take a look and begin the questions section in just a moment. Right now, we're going to go ahead and take care of the free book that Zach is so graciously providing. So we're going to go ahead. The letter is R. And Michelle, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and take a look and help me out here, since I've got, and I'm going to turn on your microphone, Michelle, if you're there.
Absolutely.
Okay, so could you just let us know what you found? The letter is R.
I'm scrolling down right now.
Okay.
Excited to announce.
Here it is.
Yay. Rachel Barraza is our winner.
Okay,
Rachel Barraza,
Rachel
Barraza.
Barraza.
Yep.
okay. And Michelle, we need Rachel. If you could do us a favor, if you're you need to be on right now, because what we do need from you is to go into the question section and put in there your name and address so we know where to send the book. So Michelle, I'm going to just ask you to take a look and see if you see that come through. Okay.
Got it. Will do. Yes.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and mute you and then move back. All right, so just a few things before we go ahead and get into the question time. So this gives everybody a chance to post their questions. We are offering a discount on our newest edition of our parent handbook. This is our 8th edition. It just released at the end of the year. We're very excited about it. If you use the discount code listed, 20 off with today's date, you will put that in the shop feature of operationparent.org. Go to the shop and you will see the new edition of the parent handbook. Put that in as your discount code and you will receive 20% off the purchase of one parent handbook. This must be ordered by Friday, February 5th in order to receive the discount. Again, go to operationparent.org and go to shop. We do have some of our older version of our parent handbook, our English version and our Christian version. You will also see that in the shop. If you want one of our older versions, they are available also for order at $5.99. You do have to pay shipping and handling, and that'll get calculated when you place your order. Just a reminder on our upcoming webinars, go to operationparent.org and then click along the top bar webinars, and you will see all of these webinars listed. They are ready for registration right now. These are also listed in your handout that you have received. It was sent to you earlier today, and then you also can download the handouts. And Zach, you were mentioning, take a screenshot of these slides, and yes, they're great slides. They are in the handout. So if anybody is worried that they didn't get to them, they are part of the handout, so they are there. You can also find Operation Parent on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and we encourage you to follow us there. And that way you can kind of keep up on what we're doing each month. All right, so let's get to some questions here. Hold on. All right. So first question is, so how old were you when you were going through these things? I have dealt with these things for most of my life, but I didn't get help until I was an adult. Now my daughter is struggling as a teen, and I don't know if she has the maturity to handle these issues. Great question, and thank you for sharing.
Yeah, it's a great question. I was 22 when I started to, so I was actually, and I was on a timer. I joke with them when we ran the practice. I could talk forever if you give me the mic. So I was on a timer. I felt like I had to speed through that. But when I was in college, I was heavily indulging myself in alcohol and cannabis, and I didn't realize it at the time, but I was covering up the symptoms that I was experiencing. But when I went into the real world and needed to show up to work and be a productive citizen, that is when everything just came rushing in. So I actually, when I reflected on my experience, I actually started to experience these symptoms as early as 19, but it really didn't come to the forefront of my mind until I was 22. And I hear this a lot with parents that have teenagers that don't think that they're emotionally mature enough to start to have these conversations and address their brain health. And what I would say is, think about it as a slow process, because just like with anything else, new information takes time to sink in with all human beings. And it took me years and actually getting to the lowest point before I was willing to accept the fact that seeking help was actually something that everybody should do, that you should take your brain health seriously. And so just working, I don't know if you said her or him, but just working with them slowly to get them, again, building that family culture, getting them to understand that brain health is so important. Everything begins and ends in the mind. So we have to take care of our brains first.
Thank you. Do you know how many tests were given for these statistics? I think we're going back to the earlier statistics that you mentioned.
So for the young adult survey that was released, it was a survey that at least surveyed, if I remember correctly, over 10,000 participants, and I might be confusing that with one other research survey that was released that I actually didn't talk about on here. So I might be flip-flopping the two, but it was a large sample size of students that they pulled from across the country.
Okay. Okay. This is a comment that kind of makes it kind of explaining why it's so scary for parents to take the next step. It said, I took my daughter into the hospital at the beginning of the month. I called and
Mhm.
talked to a nurse first, asking what it would be like. She did not prepare us at all for what the experience was. I think a big reason for people for not getting, and that's a big reason for people not getting help. It's the unknown of what's going to happen, and it was scary. I don't doubt it was
I,
scary.
I
Yeah,
completely agree.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. And it sounds like possibly went to a hospital for a mental health issue is what
Hmm. Yeah,
happened.
which probably was in crisis, I'm assuming. Normally
It's
that's the.
usually that's what happens. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
Can you just explain what happens if somebody you talked about um, people, and I understand the mental health first aid, but if somebody is actively saying, I want to kill myself, um, what should a parent do, and when should a parent take them to a hospital?
So if somebody is actively saying that they are going to kill themselves, we want to do our very best. Again, thinking through the lens of algae on diffusing the crisis through listening and understanding. So if you've already skipped A, you've assessed for risk. Now we want to move right into the listening. But what's really, really important is that we want to stay with them. We want to stay in their presence the entire time. Let's say you have to leave for work for a shift, or there's something that you need to go and do. We want to make sure that somebody else comes into the picture and stays with them. And it's somebody that has a bit of a background, some understanding on brain health and thoughts of suicide. The big thing I would say is don't try to get physical with the individual. That could intensify the situation. Don't You want to remain calm. That's another big factor. You want to come across as calm. You want to make them feel like, I understand where you're coming from. These are very normal thoughts. I'm here for you. I know that you can recover. I want to support you. You can obviously call 911, but just understand that there could be ramifications for that in terms of them now not trusting you. You do want to seek help. So you want to stay with them, and you want to do everything in your power to get them to seek help in that moment. If you need to call the authorities, you can. If you need to take them to the hospital, you can. You can also call the suicide prevention lifeline as well.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Hmm. Hmm.
How do you tell the difference between what is typical teen behavior or depression and anxiety? Or is typical teen behavior not a thing? Okay.
That's a great question.
Yeah, it is.
I think that there are patterns, right, that teenagers will display. But there's also patterns that an individual struggling with anxiety or depression will display. So the
Mm-hmm.
patterns are relatively the same. I always say you can take me out of the equation, put somebody in, and the story would be roughly the same. What I would say is the signs and symptoms are really important because they become more obvious the more that you see them. Like with the clients I work with, it becomes really obvious, like, okay, they were isolating in their room for months and months and months.
Mm.
The grades declined. There were all these things building up. But that's why we actually want to be proactive and start to build the family culture where we create open lines of communication. That's the real big thing that I want to drive home. We should eventually get to the point where talking about our brain health is like talking about taking a walk outside. It's
Mm.
just commonplace and normal. And what that does is it heads it off so that you don't have to be playing the guessing game constantly, and you're getting that information from your teenager. And so it just starts with the education process. And there's a lot of resources online. Operation Parent, maybe you have them sit on another webinar. But yeah, just I guess what I'm saying is being proactive and developing the family culture internally, I think is really, really important.
Okay. How does one get training in mental health first aid? Good question.
Yeah, every state will offer trainings. So you just go to mental health first aid. It's not .com, it's I think .org. and they'll have facilitators for every state, and you just have to schedule it, because it's not like a super systematic, like, I could sign up tomorrow to take it. They do the trainings at different times throughout the year.
Okay. A teen relative is struggling. His family has entered him in counseling and to see doctors, but he says it isn't helping and he resists. Does not want to take medication and stop communicating with them. His parents don't know what to do if what they are doing is helping him. Any suggestions?
So this is, a big part of why I coach, and a big part of, there's an entire sector in the mental health space that does this, called peer support. I mean, that's a big part of what I do on a daily basis, is conversations with individuals that are just starting on their journey, that haven't been through the experience. They haven't gone through the process of recovery. So sometimes it takes an outside individual or outside resource to have a conversation, to educate the teen or the young adult on, okay, tell me more about what you're going through. Let me understand your struggles, what you're experiencing, what you've tried, what you haven't, what's worked, what hasn't, and then relating back to them again with that vulnerability piece to build rapport and trust. If you've been there with that lived experience, share that story.
Okay. All right. Sorry, I was going through the questions and I hit something in my slide chain. Didn't mean for that to happen. Okay. This is a really interesting one. I actually work in mental health field as an outpatient manager. However, I'm also dealing with my son who is suffering from anxiety, depression. He has textbook symptoms like going between being numb, in his words, and can't stop thoughts about suicide. Always anxious, hating himself because he feels weak and hopeless. He has open communication links with me, and I do the Columbia on him at times. I'm not sure what that means. I have him in therapy and set appointments up with his doctor to discuss meds. My question is, he has no interest mostly in anything right now. School, friend, anything. It truly woke me up and scared me when he lost interest in dance. He's a dancer and loves to dance. Should I be pushing him to dance and school, etc., or give him some time to increase his brain health through therapy and medication? Wow.
That is an excellent question. Excellent question. So this is that delicate balance. But you do not want him to fall completely into a pattern of doing nothing at all, because that's going to create a habit. And I've seen that. Unfortunately, we weren't talking about brain health when I was a teen, and I've now seen that manifest itself with many of my friends and how they cope with anxiety or depression. This is why I'm actually a huge advocate of meditation, because it creates mindfulness. So what ends up happening is, as human beings, we have thousands and thousands of thoughts a day. I think it's something like 30,000. So our brain is more powerful than a computer, at least for now. I mean, that might change according to Elon Musk. That's going to be happening any day. But so what ends up happening is the CEO of our brain sees these thoughts come into our consciousness, and we latch onto them. We choose, okay, this is a part of my identity. This is something I believe in. I disregard this. So we're constantly doing this all day long. And the challenge with anxiety or depression is that they're sending us these distressed signals all day long, and we choose to latch onto them because it's all that we know. But the development of mindfulness creates a gap, creates a space between the thought and then the feeling or behavior that you have towards that thought. And so that's where I'm a huge advocate of mindfulness and meditation, is because it is actually a muscle that you build over time, where he can begin to have an anxious thought or a depressed thought. For example, he could have an automatic negative thought that's like, I feel depressed today, so I'm not going to do my activity. He can be mindful of that. He can even be mindful of his brain sending him signals that he doesn't enjoy that anymore. And he can say, okay, I understand that I had that thought, but I know that I know what the symptoms of depression are. And I also know that prior to experiencing depression, I really enjoyed dance. So I'm going to, now this gets into the incremental goal setting or behavioral activation. I'm going to go dance for 10 minutes. That's it. I'm going to give myself 10 minutes of dance. If I feel like dancing more after that, I can. If I don't, then I can go lay on the couch if that's what he's doing, if he's going to his room, whatever it is. But getting him to incrementally get back into the things that he's interested in. And studies have shown that the more that we do that, the more that we can actually start to lift that depression and work around it.
Okay, great
Yeah.
advice. When your teen has deadlines for applications or schoolwork and he or she is feeling overwhelmed, how can you get them to do what needs to be done without doing it for them?
That's a great question. I see this with a lot of parents. Sometimes it's just easier to do it for them. And we have these expectations. We want them to start acting like adults and taking on responsibilities. So the first thing is, as a brain health advocate, I have to say this, consider where they're at with their emotional well-being. Are they experiencing severe depression? Are they experiencing severe anxiety? And thinking about, how can I get the best of both worlds? So maybe it's sitting down with them and filling out the paperwork with them, and with the promise that next time they'll take a crack at it and you'll help them if they need it. So thinking about little incremental ways to get them to engage in activities and responsibilities without guilting them, making them feel guilty for not taking on the responsibility, because that just hinders progress and builds frustration and closes the door to open communication, trust, rapport, and respect. The other thing is we want to build coping skills. One of the biggest coping skills is the recognition of automatic negative thoughts, which is a component of CBT, and how we take action against those thoughts. Another coping mechanism is the meditation and the mindfulness. So how can I sit in my anxiety, cognitively understand that I'm experiencing anxiety, cognitively understand what the symptoms of anxiety are, and still take action against that anxiety without it letting it hinder my feelings or my behaviors. To give you an example, I felt anxious before this program. I feel anxious before every speech I give. I'm somebody that lives with anxiety. Prior to a speech, my brain is screaming at me, sending me signals. You're sick. Don't do this. Don't go. This is going to be dangerous or whatever. But through mindfulness, through meditation, I can sit with that feeling and still move forward in action. So it's a skill that's built over time. But think about behavioral activation, incremental steps, and then the coping tools.
Okay. Somebody was asking, how long would these symptoms be going on before you really kind of say, you know what, this is not normal? So sleeping, staying in the room all the time. How is there like a guideline? 2 weeks. That's what I've heard
2
many
weeks.
times. 2
2
weeks.
weeks. Yep.
Yep.
And it's
Okay.
good. Catch it early. And we want, when it comes to brain health, and this was been something that was very frustrating to me when I first got into the space. It's very fragmented. Our brain, there are so many factors that impact our brain and our emotional well-being. So taking a holistic approach. So I love you talking about the sleep. So working on dialing in the sleep, measuring that metric, dialing in the coping mechanisms, and actually putting numbers behind them, because they tell a story. And I can track back my emotional well-being seriously on a weekly basis based on my performance in those different areas.
Okay. Are there any peer support groups for anxiety and depression? Can I just answer real quick too on this, if you don't mind?
Please. Yes.
Um, there are. You need to go find them. We're in Louisville, Kentucky. There is Dr. Tony Shepard has groups that his organization is called Group Works, and he actually focuses on teens, anxiety, depression. Great counseling group. But the best way to do it is to find it through Psychology Today. As Zach said, put in your zip code, put in what you're looking for, and you can find them. Zach, do you know other ways to find those groups?
I've found a lot on Facebook.
Oh,
I I've found
great.
a lot on Facebook. Yeah, and I'm kind of always popping in and out of those groups. I see somebody's comment and hack
Hmm.
away some advice because I can't help myself. Or just trying to be supportive again. I don't always know
Hmm.
somebody's situation, so just trying to plant that seed of hope. But yeah, you can find a lot on Facebook. You can Google. You literally could probably search in Facebook teen anxiety and depression. In fact, I think I'm in one of those groups, teen anxiety and depression support group.
Okay, great. You did mention your meditation apps. I think you mentioned Calm, and what
Yeah,
was the other one? Um,
Headspace. Headspace is the
Headspace.
one that I
Hmm.
use.
I
Yep.
use Insight Timer, so it's
Oh,
just a
cool.
different one. Yeah, I like that one. Okay. How would you prioritize nutrition?
Love this question. Nutrition is a huge factor, and I would have that's a whole other presentation in and of itself. But essentially, essentially what we want to work to avoid is processed foods and sugar. So eventually we want to steer, like one of the biggest things that I see, like when I work one-on-one, because I don't always get this in speeches. That's why I'm referencing the one-on-one, because I get these conversations, is the kid will love fast food. Like that's all that they'll eat. Or they'll love sugary foods. And those are like gasoline for the brain. And just the overall functionality. So we really want to focus on foods like fish, foods that are high in fatty acids, fish oil, B12. So it gets back to what we've been taught from day one, but really trying to drill into that, which is a diet high in veggies, lean meats, and reducing sugar and processed foods as much as possible. And I literally do not eat fast food at all. I limit my sugar intake, and I rarely drink. And this is somebody who went from drinking all the time and smoking all the time to doing none of that, because it's not good for your brain.
Yeah, and it gets harder when they're in college to find those kinds of things
Yes,
consistently. It's very hard. I've got one in college now, and we talk about it all the time. So
it's a huge challenge.
it is a very huge challenge. You touched on putting limits on social media, and what are your feelings on gaming? Ways to help a 13-year-old to put limits on gaming when he sneaks when he's not permitted. Now we cannot turn off the Wi-Fi due to work and school, so he's sneaking
Hmm.
it when he shouldn't be.
Yeah. So I'll address social media first. We want to minimize that number as much as possible between us, because there's a linear correlation. So the more time that they spend, the more likely that they are to experience anxiety and depression, because fundamentally they're engaging in comparison theory. They're getting on, they are comparing
Mm,
themselves to their peers. There's nothing, even the most trained brain, me myself, I get on this app and sometimes I feel icky afterwards because I'm not here,
yeah.
I'm here in terms of followers, likes, etc., engagement, which
Hmm.
it's so deeply ingrained in the human brain to crave validation, connection, respect. So just understanding that we want to minimize that. In terms of video games, in COVID eras, I'm comfortable with it within boundaries, because especially if he's playing with friends. So if he's playing live and he's got the headset and he's talking to his buddies, this is actually a way to stay connected in the pandemic. We just want to put constraints around it, because to completely pull it out right now is to take a lifeline away from him. And I've seen this now with so many parents that they're like, my kid is playing way more than normal, but
Yeah.
it makes him happy and he's connecting with his friends. And I'm like, for now, let it be, because
Hmm.
and this New York Times article talks about it. I'm seeing it in the real world. These kids want to get outside. They want to play sports. They want to hang out with their friends. But in quarantine time, it's just been hard. So
Yeah.
giving them some lifeline into connection.
Yeah. It is a difficult time for everybody. A lot of thank yous. I have a few things I'll send to you privately. Um, this is a thank you. This is a thank you, but then it's also saying, has a 13-year-old daughter getting anxiety attacks where she's sobbing and hyperventilating. When I
Hmm.
encounter having one of these attacks, what are the best things I can say or do to help her get through it?
So you can do the rule of five, and this gets
Okay.
back into mindfulness. So you can train her to do this. Find 5 things that she can see,
Yeah.
4 things that she can touch. I want to say it's like 3 things. I don't think it's smell, but it's you're grounding yourself.
Right.
I can't remember what 2 and 1 are, because I personally use breathing for panic attacks. So the next thing that you can do, because a lot of times they start breathing fast, is slowly get her to start focusing on her breathing and letting it slowly come back into a normal pattern of breathing. And that's what I use for my panic attacks, because sometimes I'll feel like I'm about to faint, and I do that through breathing and then grounding. So you can
Hmm.
do the rule of five, which you can Google, or you can do grounding, where you get her to start focusing on her feet on the ground and maybe a hand on a surface, and just focusing on that touch, and then beginning
Hmm.
to focus on her breath.
Okay. Somebody made a comment, there's therapists are available through FEMA right now, and teen lines are good too. I'm not familiar with teen lines. Are you familiar with teen lines?
No, I'm going to write this down and research this. I'm always
Yeah,
trying
so
to know
apparently
more.
FEMA is offering and teen lines. I'm going to look that one up too.
Yep.
Will virtual therapy be bad if children are addicted to electronics?
If they need it, they need it. And if it's the only option,
Yeah, for some
then
people it is.
it's the place to start, because you can eventually get them in person. But yeah, if they need the therapy, I would say at that moment, give them what they need, and then we can work on, or you can work on weaning them off their addiction to technology.
Okay. Says I work closely with teenagers in a school setting. What would you say are the top 3 pieces of wisdom you would share in regards to what they need to hear right now when they are isolated and the world as they know it is turned upside down, as they don't have extracurricular, sports, time with friends, etc.?
Mm. So the first thing, I mean, this is what I do for a living, is infusing hope. Hope, hope, hope. Hope is the seed that leads to recovery. So hope constantly, just words of validation, and then acknowledgement. Let's not pretend like they're not struggling. So opening up those lines of communication. Hey, if you're struggling with anxiety or depression, I want you to know that that's normal. That's okay. And it's something that we should all be comfortable talking about. That would be number 2. And then providing resources. My big lifelong goal is to eventually have it so that during gym class, in conjunction with the physical aspect, every gym class meditates for 10 minutes. Teach this one simple trick, this one simple tool to the entire country, and we would see a massive decrease in violence and anxiety and depression and thoughts of suicide. I can't emphasize enough how important of a tool this is. So as an educator, providing tools, resources, and the easiest one and most inexpensive is meditation.
Okay. You identify as a mental health advocate. How is your work similar or different to a mental health professional? Great question.
I don't diagnose.
Yep.
I don't diagnose and I don't treat. My coaching program is very, like, if you work with me, you have to be working with the therapist as well if you're experiencing anxiety or depression, because I work on the lifestyle behavior side of things. So there's the clinical side and then there's the holistic side. I'm on the holistic side.
Okay. Any experience or opinions with MTFHR and the underdeveloped frontal cortex?
No. Mm-mm.
Okay.
But I'm going to write that down and look into that. What MT?
I think that's a therapy method. MTFHR. But I
Okay.
could be completely wrong. I think I've heard that somewhere along the years.
Okay. I'm going to look into that.
We have time for 2 more questions, and I do realize that we have a lot of questions. And Zach, I'm hoping you're going to be perfectly fine. I think we talked about this before, that I will send you a spreadsheet with the remaining questions, and for you to just shoot back and answer to them. Is that good with you still?
Of course. This is
Okay.
what I live to do.
All
Love to
right.
help.
Let's see. Here we go. It says, would this book help my 29-year-old son, or is it more directed toward teens?
I wrote it to that age group, and I've had people in their 50s say that they read it and it was helpful.
Okay.
Everybody's a little different. I mean, it's gotten solid reviews on Amazon. From the feedback, phone calls, messages, texts, emails I've gotten, it's helpful for
Okay.
it seems to be a wide range of individuals.
All right. How can you buy the book?
You
I'm
can
gonna
go
back here, guys.
Yeah,
Go
there's
ahead.
2 ways. Yeah, you can go to zachwesterbeck.com. It's on the front page. So you click, it'll say you're not alone. You can click that link. It'll take you to another page. Click it again, and then that'll reroute you to Amazon where you can buy it, or you can go directly to Amazon. But if you want to click around the web page, you can go there and still end up where the book is located, which is on Amazon.
Okay. What apps do you recommend for sleep metrics and movement? From your slides, you had those screens showing up.
Well, I can only, because I only use one, I guess I can only recommend one. And I know that there's plenty out there. So if anybody has any other suggestions, I certainly don't think I have all the answers. So if anybody else has an answer, pop it in the chat for
Mhm.
others to benefit from. But I use auto sleep. And I like
Okay.
that because it goes in depth on it shows me the amount of deep sleep I get every single day, which is really the core metric that I actually look at, because I can see how much deep sleep I've gotten on a particular day and tie that back to my mood and energy levels. So I use auto sleep for that. And then I just let my Apple Watch track my movement. So every single time I step outside for a walk, I just go to the movement app, click start, it counts me down. I don't know if you can see that, but
Mhm.
anyways, you can click you can click different things: outdoor walk, outdoor run, functional strength training, outdoor cycle, indoor walk. So the list goes on and on. But I just use that and it automatically tracks it back to my phone. And I like using technology as a way to track these metrics, because again, what you track improves. And for this age group, we want to make it so simple they can't fail. That's one of my philosophies with my coaching clients. We want to make life so simple you can't fail. So automating as many things as we possibly can.
Okay. This is going to be the last question, Michelle. I'm going to bring you back in at the same time here. So the question is, if my son has gone to counseling and decided he didn't want to continue, how do I get him to go back?
So it's first off understanding why he doesn't want to go back.
Mm.
What about seek to understand, seek to understand, seek to understand. What about the process didn't he like? What
Mhm.
about the talk therapy that he didn't like? What did he like? So understanding both components, and then seeing if he'd be willing to get his buy-in on giving the process a couple more tries, because it really is a trial and error process.
Mhm.
And like, I will call into numerous therapists and I will try to get reviews, people who have used them prior to understand their demeanor, their personality, their process, everything, to try to narrow down that window.
Okay. Michelle, did we have luck getting a hold of Rachel?
She's still on with us. So
Okay.
yes, I'll
Okay.
make sure she gets the book. Yes.
All right.
We had lots of
Um,
other people saying if she's not on, they'll take it.
Gosh, I wish I could give away a book to everybody. I really
Oh
do.
yes.
no.
Yes.
The other thing I wanted to just remind our audience is that we've got two gaming webinars up in the library for folks that are looking into extreme gaming issues with their teens. Dr. Paul Weigel has done a past webinar for us, as well as Dr. Clifford Sussman. So those might be of value to some of the
Mhm.
guests that are with us today. And personally, on the nutrition note, I found a nice resource this week, Zach, that I think you and Mary Beth would both love. It's 100 days of real food,
Mm.
Oh.
is the name, and it's really good. Like, it really helps you look at the processed food type of thing. And then the other thing I wanted to do is recognize Mary Beth for this building of this webinar program. We wanted to let those that are still on with us know that Mary Beth is moving on to other things in her life, but she has been with us for a long time. And this webinar program would not be here if it weren't for her tenacity and persistence and vision for being able to reach people across the country. So Mary Beth, we value you so much. You know, you have an open invitation to be a host, a guest, a presenter, whenever your time might allow. But thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for everything that you've done for Operation Parent.
Thank you, Michelle. It's been a wonderful 12 years, but it's been wonderful, and I will miss it. I will miss it, and thank you. And Zach, it's been great to have this as my last webinar, so I really appreciate it. There are more
Honor.
questions, Zach, and we will be. I'll send you an email tomorrow with the remaining questions. And thank you, everyone, for being here today. Zach, wonderful. Looking forward to reading your book and getting the chance to enjoy a book at this stage of the game. um,
Absolutely.
all
Yes,
right.
we're excited for you about that, and we're going to miss you greatly. And Zach, thank you so much.
All right.
Thank
Well,
you. I really appreciate it.
okay, with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the webinar. keep an eye out, operationparent.org. Go to webinars for the future webinars that are coming up. Please look in your email for the handouts. If you have not received the handouts, you can't find them, check your junk or spam folder. Sometimes they get put there. So with that, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for all the fun years. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Take care.